In the first Google Forms video, there were just a couple of things that weren't talked about that I want to mention that I think are important. The first one can be found up here in the settings. So if you click on the settings wheel, the default in Mounds View is for the responses to only be allowed for anyone in moundsviewschools.org. You can always change this to anyone, and then anyone can answer your Google form. So if you want to do something for parents, you would want to make sure that you change it to anyone as opposed to in Mounds View Schools. But when Mounds View Schools is selected, this is what I want to show you. There's an important checkbox that's probably a good idea to check most of the time, where it will automatically collect the respondents' usernames when they submit a form. So that way, when your students take a form, you'll always have their username attached to their results. So I always like to keep that checked. The other thing that you can check if you want to is there's a can submit only one response, which means that a student can only answer the form one time and can't do it multiple times. So you may want to have that checked sometimes as well. The next thing I want to talk about is data validation. There are many different questions that have data validation within Google Forms. And so I want to talk about what data validation is and give a couple of examples. So if I go to short answer question, for example, and I didn't put paragraph on here, but paragraph answer does the same basic thing. If I go to the three dots down at the bottom, one of my choices down here is to show a data validation. And if I check on that, it brings up the data validation at the bottom of my question. And data validation basically means that you want to specify a certain answer. So for example, some of the data validation, if you're doing math type questions, you might want to set a number that's greater than a certain amount, so that if for whatever reason you don't want lower numbers than something, you can do that. There's also lots of other choices for your numbers. You want whole numbers, between two numbers, equal to, things like that. You can also do different things with text as well. So you can do text that contains specific words, or you can do a few specific texts, like you want an email address. So if they don't have a proper email address, then it doesn't work. Or you want a URL. So if they don't do an appropriate URL, it doesn't work as a URL, then it wouldn't work. So those types of things are data validation. The other thing that happens over here is you can do a custom error text. So if the student doesn't do this question right, like let's say that they put a number that's too big, you can say the number you put in was too large, please reread and try again. So you can add your own text so that they know that they got it wrong, and it gives them a little information about what they did that was wrong. The other thing that I want to point out, and this you can see in a multiple choice question, is they don't actually have data validation for multiple choice, but what they do is they have the choice to go to section based on an answer, and we'll get into that in branching forms. So I'll kind of leave that there, but there is this option to go to section based on an answer that you'll need to know how to do. I'm going to scoot down here just a little bit. Drop-down questions have the same type of a thing. So if you have a drop-down that lists 4 different choices, you can have students go to different pages based on the choices that they made from the drop-down menu. Another one that has data validation is checkboxes, and the data validation for checkboxes is basically to identify how many boxes they can check. So if you have 10 boxes as your choices, maybe you want them to select at least 3 answers, or you want them to select exactly 4 answers out of the 10, or something like that. So you can choose how many of the boxes you want the students to check as part of your checkboxes. The last thing that I wanted to talk about as far as these go is the multiple choice grid. And the one thing that I wanted to say about this is not a data validation thing, but it's that a lot of times people will use these for rubrics or for self-evaluations for students, because that's kind of what the multiple choice is, I think, designed for. So it works really well for that. Last thing for this video, and I'm going to go up to multiple choice to do this, is I want to talk about duplicating. There's a button down here at the bottom that's basically a duplicate button, And what I like to do is I like to prep one question on my quiz. So let's say that I'm going to do 10 multiple choice questions. I want to prep one and get it all ready to go. I have the right number of options. In this case, I have 3 options. And I also like to make the question required. And then once it's required, I can hit the duplicate button. And then I can just simply duplicate this one question as many times as I need it. And then I can go back and start writing in the information for each question. I feel like this goes quicker than if you try to make one question and then make a second question. And the other thing that happens is if you check it to be required right away, then all 10 of your questions that you've duplicated are also required. And what I tend to do is I forget to check this box every once in a while. So I might have the first 3 questions required and then I'll forget and my 4th question is not required. If I require the question and then duplicate it, I don't have to worry about that. And again, all I have to do to duplicate is just hit the duplicate button, and then it'll create the question right below the last one. And I can keep duplicating until I get as many as I want. So that's a few additional things on Google Forms. I hope that this helps you out and clarifies some of the things from the previous video.